Hello, this is Justin from Auto Trading Academy. So in this video we're going to look at how can STP brokers actually go bankrupt, and this can seem quite puzzling to many people, since obviously STP brokers just act as middlemen and just pass your trades straight through into the liquidity providers, the real market. So how can this happen? And obviously a really good example here is the Swiss franc event on the January 15th in 2015, and Alpari as well, which FXCM almost went bankrupt but got rescued with a $300 million loan, which was basically their losses from this event, and Alpari basically went bust. So very big brokers, the biggest in the world, almost went broke because of this scenario in a way. And obviously most brokers nowadays are hybrid between dealing desk and STP, so I'll go into these details later, but essentially we're going to look here purely from an STP perspective. So I don't actually know how many of the losses were due to the STP side, but I think it's a significant part. But effectively, how can this really happen? Well, what's really happening in ECN STP brokerage is when you place a trade, let's say you go short the franc on any currency, let's say against any currency, you're going short the franc, the brokerage basically goes long and then he goes short, which effectively is the same as you going short, and then passes that straight through into the market, which basically translates as you going short, and the brokerage acting as the pure intermediary and basically charging you spread or commission for that trade. So essentially that's how it works, whereas in a dealing desk it's the opposite. You're basically just trading against the brokerage and your trades aren't really going into the market. So how can this possibly happen? And just like in any crisis event, in any business really, as you probably all know, if you're a good businessman, any middleman gets crushed from both sides and basically buggered and screwed. And effectively in the crisis in 2008-2009, middlemen business, which were basically buy and sell stuff through suppliers and so on. So that's that sort of business. They were basically screwed the most because they got crushed from both sides of the equation, the demand side and the supply side. So it's the same with the brokerage. Being a middleman, you have counterparty risk, which is basically the main thing, and that's what can basically crush you from both sides, which is exactly what happened with FXCM and Alpari. So even though the broker doesn't take on any market risk, which is the opposite with a dealing desk broker, so they don't take any market risk because they're simply passing you through by taking the opposite trade on each trade that you take and then translating it into the market. So basically hedging all their exposure. So they don't take any market risk, but basically you have other risks, which is basically the counterparty risk. And there's two counterparties here. There's the market, the liquidity providers, and the traders. So in a crisis event, which is basically what happened, a liquidity event, essentially the market jumped and there was basically no market between was it basically it jumped from I think 1.18 to like 1.02, and most charts show a nice straight line of the jump, but actually there is no straight line. There is just a big gap, a black hole basically. And what happens to all your trades is they get dragged along, and you as a broker, you also get dragged along with that price, and that's basically one of your risks when you're that type of brokerage. So what happens when you get dragged along? Well, basically if the traders are short the euro franc, then that's basically not very good for you. Because you get dragged along with that price, with all those trades, along with the market, because the market is your counterparty providing you with the liquidity. And essentially a lot of clients will lose money beyond their accounts because their stop losses are not honored. So basically in such events, usually stop losses are not honored, and actually it's stupid to think that stop losses are guaranteed, because a lot of people for some reason think that stop losses are sort of guaranteed. Well, they're definitely not, and this event showed just by how much. So effectively what happens is that your stop losses don't work and the market moves way beyond your stop losses, and you lose way more. So if you had a margin call and you were stopped out in a normal case, in a normal market scenario, everything is fine. The brokerage, everything moves, works nice and smooth. You get stopped out. You don't have any more money to lose. The market liquidity providers get what you basically lost. But in such an event, what happens is you lose more than you can. You lose your margin, and you go beyond, and basically the brokerage has to cover those losses from their own capital account and provide it to the basically liquidity providers and so on. So they get squashed from that side, from the client trader level side, because the traders lose their money because their stop losses basically don't get honored by the market, and basically you have to cover that up. And then you've got the counterparty side risk on the other side, which is basically your liquidity providers not being able to honor your profits. So you've got the one side, which is basically losses. So all the guys that were going short, now you have to cover their losses because the stop losses got hit way beyond than they should have been cleared. And then all the guys that they were going long, who won all of those profits, you might get a few liquidity providers that were basically in that trade for you and are not honoring on your profits because they've gone bust as well. So you're basically squeezed for cash from both sides. You've got to cover these losses, and you don't get the profits from the liquidity providers. Obviously, in ECN market, there's many liquidity providers out there, and I'm not sure how many of the losses were basically in FXCM case were due to liquidity providers not filling up on their obligations, but I'm sure there were definitely some there from that side as well. Mainly I think the losses were through the client side, though, from the counterparty side of the client, where basically they were going into a big minus beyond their deposit size. So you can lose more than you have. One of the risk disclosures in the when you open Forex accounts, and basically stop losses are not guaranteed. So mainly it's all because the stop losses are not honored, because the market basically doesn't exist. You can't trade anything in between that gap. You can only trade where that market appears after the gap, and that's what basically crushed FXCM with $300 million loss, and Alpari as well, which went bust. So biggest brokers in the world can go broke, and this is one of the reasons and how it happened. I'm not sure of the exact percentages of these causes here, but I'm pretty sure they were the major side. Now with a dealing desk broker, it's slightly different, and essentially with a dealing desk you don't really pass the trades through onto the market, and you take on the market risk to provide your client basically with the ability to trade those instruments. So essentially you're taking on market risk and creating that market for him, and you're basically always trading against your client. So if he goes longs, you go short. So his losses are your profits, and your profits, his profits are your losses. And essentially you don't have any counterparty risk there, because you're basically just trading against your clients, and the only risk that you have is the market risk. So very, very different from the STP CN type model. And actually, these guys, the dealing desks, did much better in terms of holding up in this event than the STP CN, which is quite contrary to what many people believe. They think it's the dealing desks that went bust and bankrupt, but actually it's the STP CN brokers that went bust and bankrupt. So in this case, they're shielded a lot more. They have no counterparty risk. And here in this case, what happens if you made a lot of profit, then basically they just lost a lot of money. And actually in this case, SaxoBank I think wrote some not very nice letters where you think you've made a killing basically because of the market jumping, but actually they write to you that the market didn't exist, and they're not going to give you all the profits that you should be getting, and they're basically going to revise your stop losses and where your market should have been closed, which is not a very nice way of honoring your commitments. So those guys that thought they made a killing didn't, and the guys that thought they made the big losses also didn't, because brokers such as Oanda also wrote to their clients that, oh, we're not gonna pursue the guys that lost more money than they should have, which is, you know, impossible in reality. It's just a load of basically bullshit to make them, you know, look good. But essentially, you know, you can't go beyond your deposit size. You can't lose more than your deposit with these guys, effectively, because that, you know, you're trading against them, and your stop losses are honored. So even though it may look like, you know, there was a big gap and the market jumped, and, you know, you got this, your stop losses, let's say, didn't get triggered in that way, but actually what happens is the stop losses do get triggered in the dealing desk environment, because it's basically all just a big hoax in a way, and basically, yeah, you know, it's not possible to lose more than your deposit size, because the stop losses do get hit, and yeah, they basically make all your money. They make all the money that you lose in your account, and no more. So that's pretty much how it works. Hopefully to clear this up for you guys, just to understand that, you know, big brokers can go bust, and there are some inherent big risks with STP ECN brokers as well. And, you know, the Swiss franc event was a very good example of that. So I hope you guys like this video, and I'll see you in another one.